to win the state according to our 538 numbers, and that's a county, Union County, now that has 94% of the vote in already. So it's a significant amount of vote. Davidson County, another example of this, where he's slightly ahead of his benchmark. So we're seeing them run, a kind of an even race in the places we have a lot of data right now. We'll see where it lands at the end of the night. But Trump is turning out people in very red parts of the state and across the country. It's a trend we're seeing even in states that aren't that competitive. The Trump base is out in force.
Let's look at Nash County. Can you find Nash County for me? It's
I don't know how to do this.
Boomerang counties that went for Trump, but then went for Biden. Also, New Hanover in North Carolina here. We probably should take a slightly deeper dive on whether or not
Nash County is Trump is winning.
Yeah, right. So it's right here, right outside of Raleigh. This is one of those that we're watching, as you mentioned, David, because there's a possibility, at least for Democrats, that flip counties like this. You see how close Hillary Clinton came, how close Joe Biden came. Right now, Kamala Harris not quite over the finish line. Donald Trump winning by about 1,800 votes in Nash County. And the benchmark would suggest he doesn't even need to win that county.
Yeah.
Could slip away from him and still be in line. This is a small county, but you're right. It's emblematic of what's going on across the state and really across the region of the country.
And it could be a bellwether, in fact, because this is what Donald Trump is trying to do, is flip some of this territory back his way from 4 years ago. We'll just keep our eye on it. I want to take this up to Byron Pitts because he's in Asheville tonight. And Byron, there was a lot of concern, obviously, over the victims of Hurricane Helene and whether or not they would be able to vote in both campaigns, saying that they did like what they saw on the ground as far as the effort to help people have their voices heard. And what have you seen there on the ground?
But David, this has to be one of the feel-good stories of this election night, regardless of which side wins. David, you spent a lot of time here after the hurricane. You saw the devastation firsthand. It is remarkable, the turnout here. Western North Carolina outperformed the rest of the state in early voting. And that's a good sign for the Trump campaign. As you guys have been discussing, Western North Carolina has been reliably Trump country, and he has to do well here, and it is doing well here. The voting is high. There are parts of the western part of the state where they've had to vote in tents. We talked to one voter, a pastor, who called the response here in Western North Carolina, he calls it the miracle of the mountains. This is a man, consider this. He had to drive 1 hour and 45 minutes to vote. He had to leave his house, drive into Tennessee, circle a mountain, come back to his community, cross a river before he could vote. And it speaks to not just the resilience of the people in this part of the country, but also their commitment to democracy. And David, I talked to a member of the Trump campaign here in North Carolina. He said the race in North Carolina tonight is as tight as a facelift. And so while they're doing well in North Carolina, there are other areas of the state that look favorable for Kamala Harris. 55.4% of the early vote in North Carolina that went to women, and that's a record in the state. 24% of the uncommitted voters were first-time voters, which is an indication that young people are voting in high numbers here. There are people standing in line still in Charlotte in some of the university areas, likely young voters, also potentially a good sign for the Harris campaign. I know earlier you and Lindsay were talking about black voters in North Carolina. I want to mention to you the central part of the state and North Carolina A&T. North Carolina A&T is the largest HBCU in the country. Aggie pride runs deep in the state. And so expect Harris to do well in that part of the state, and also in eastern North Carolina, where A&T has one of its largest alumni chapters. So there's a lot going on in North Carolina, still tight, and both camps see reason to be optimistic at this point.
Byron Pitts on the ground in Asheville. You can see they still have so much work ahead of them in the cleanup of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Rick, let's pull up North Carolina since we've heard so much from Byron on this, and let's visit a couple more of these areas one more time. Can you do the Wake County, obviously the Research Triangle, Raleigh, Durham County right around there? Let's just see how both candidates are performing according to the benchmark of where they would need to be at this hour.
Yeah, the Research Triangle, where you have Durham with Duke University and University of North Carolina, just one county over. This is an area where Democrats have really leaned in and tried to get as many of the votes as they can. You see Hillary Clinton's numbers tick up a little bit to Joe Biden. Kamala Harris so far tonight with about 3/4 of the vote in, doing better than either of the previous two Democratic candidates. And that is about what she needs to be getting in a place like Wake County. So you see these big numbers and you see her getting 140,000 votes more than Donald Trump there. That is what she needs to be doing in a state where she currently is trailing. We don't have a lot of vote yet in Durham, but this is going to be heavily for Kamala Harris. The numbers in Orange County, again, that's where UNC Chapel Hill is. You're seeing again Harris about hitting the numbers that she needs to at the 538 in the 538 benchmarks. So this area is coming through for her. There's no question about that. Again, though, those gains are being offset by Trump gains elsewhere in the state. Just to look down at Brunswick County, it's an area where Donald Trump's running a little ahead of his benchmark. And as we were discussing a little earlier, outside Charlotte, again, these are places where Donald Trump should be winning, and he is winning by a little bit more than he'd be expected to.
It's kind of interesting what we're seeing here in some of these counties. He's overperforming slightly, and so is she in some of the urban areas and some of the areas, the research triangle in particular with students. Let's go over to Charlotte. Let's just check out Charlotte one more time, Mecklenburg, and just see where we are in benchmark.
Yeah, we have almost nothing in from Charlotte so far. It's just about all the early by mail votes, so we're going to have to wait to see how that comes in.
And at least in the early by vote, she's outperforming where she needs to be. So again, it's kind of an unfinished story here, obviously, in North Carolina. 41% of the vote in, and appears to be quite a tight race here in North Carolina. What do we know about Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Pennsylvania, we've been watching really closely because so far the Harris team has to like what it sees. Now, a lot of the vote has come in so far has been early. And as we've mentioned, early vote is not as big a story as it is elsewhere. But Harrisburg, as an example right now, that county, Donald Trump not getting anywhere near where he would need on the 538 benchmarks. And Kamala Harris, again, it's early. We'll see where it goes, running significantly ahead of where the previous Democrats have. You asked me a little bit earlier about Scranton and about Wilkes-Barre, Lackawanna County, another story where Harris, with about 2/3 of the vote in, running ahead of the 538 numbers, running ahead of Donald Trump. Luzerne County, that is one that has slipped away from Democrats. If these numbers hold, that would be a true surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if they change as the night goes on. And we've been focused in on all those collar counties. We're waiting for a lot of vote to come in from them, but Harris running ahead of the 538 benchmarks and ahead of Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton's numbers. That is probably the most closely watched of those Philadelphia suburban counties, about 5-6% of the vote overall. And we're, of course, waiting on a lot of vote out of Philadelphia. And if you just look at this, you see those big blue dots at the eastern part of the state. Once again, those are places we're waiting for vote. Those red dots, though, are significant, and they add up as they move across the state.
20% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris with an early lead here. And again, so much of the vote still needs to be counted, but you got to wonder if we're looking, and it's early, I'm just saying, if we're looking out at this blue wall strategy coming to life as we're watching these numbers come in from Georgia, where she's not hitting some of the benchmarks that she needs. In North Carolina, still kind of an untold story. Pretty close, actually, when you dig into those counties and see where the vote still remains. But in Pennsylvania, at least with the early vote so far, it appears that she's hitting some of the benchmarks that she hoped to and outperforming them, particularly in the collar counties there with some more conservative leaning suburbs of Philadelphia. So quite a story unfolding here. So this is where the numbers come in. This is where it actually gets really interesting. So don't go away. We'll dig back into Pennsylvania and Michigan also. The first numbers coming in from Michigan. We'll look at it all right after the break. Don't go away. ABC News live coverage of the presidential election continues right after this.
Can you believe this, man?
Everyone's getting that new Simply Safe outdoor monitoring. Now they can help prevent crime before it even happens.
How do we compete with AI-powered outdoor cameras that alert live agents of an intruder?
Stop. This is Simply Safe. Police are on the way.
Whoa, I didn't even see those guys.
So what about us now?
Luckily, I'm pretty adorable. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Welcome back to our live coverage of the 2024 presidential election. Here's a quick look at where things stand here. Take a look. It's the path to 270, as you can see on your screen. Kamala Harris, 30 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 154 tonight. They need 270 to win. Still very early. Georgia hasn't been called. North Carolina hasn't been called. It's getting interesting in Pennsylvania. Have a look at those numbers. The first numbers coming in from Michigan right after the break. Our live coverage of election night continues right after this.
Election Night 2024 on ABC. Here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to our live election night coverage right here on ABC. We do have a winner, projected winner in the state of Delaware. Vice President Kamala Harris picking up the 3 electoral votes. She wins the state of Delaware, and in the Senate race there, the Democrat Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, 4-term Congresswoman, looking to become the new senator in that open seat. She wins that race, and Rachel Scott, this is quite a win.
Yeah, it is, David. History made here in Delaware. Lisa Blunt Rochester becoming the first Black woman to win a Senate seat in this state. David, I had a chance to sit down with her just a few weeks ago. We talked about the history that she was going to be potentially making. She told me she's going to be thinking about all the little girls, not only just having Vice President Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, but also the history that she could be making in this state as well. David, we're also going to be keeping our eye also on one more state, and this is going to be Maryland, where Angela Alsobrooks is running, also has a chance to make history tonight. She's running against former Governor Larry Hogan in this state as well. Angela Alsobrooks, close ally of Vice President Kamala Harris, a very close friend. But if she were to win this race, this would be the first time that we would ever see 2 Black women serving in the Senate at the same time.
This has been a fascinating race to actually watch because the two are somewhat friendly in their debate. I don't know, it was the most cordial debate I saw in the entire election cycle. They started out by saying, I respect for you, I respect for you. We worked together when he was the governor and she was the county executive. But we'll be watching that race very carefully as well tonight. Of course, popular Republican governor who went against Trump at certain points during the Trump administration, looking to compete in a heavily Democratic state. But history already made, though, in the state of Delaware. Rachel, thanks. Rick Klein, what are you seeing in Michigan?
Yeah, we're just our first glimpse into the numbers in Michigan. It's an interesting state because it's one of them that actually made it easier to start processing and counting those ballots. They also did in-person voting in Michigan for the first time on a widespread way. We should note that everything we're seeing here is kind of mixed. Some election day, some early vote. We also have seen nothing at all from Wayne County, which is Detroit and Dearborn, something we're going to talk about a lot so far. But Washtenaw County, right outside of Detroit, that's an area where Kamala Harris needs to be doing extremely well. And we're tracking her below, so far, her benchmark. We're about half the vote in. She's not quite hitting that number. And it's an area where Joe Biden really cleaned up, did better than Hillary Clinton's number. Right now, at least, again, it's hard to tell because we don't have a full portrait of the pictures.
That's University of Michigan, that's Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, a liberal area of the state. It's also got some suburban areas that a good number of Republicans live there as well. Oakland County, another big county that we're going to be watching all night tonight. You can see from the 538 numbers, Harris a little bit ahead of where she would want to be. But we're going to see this storyline continually. Republican parts of the state, Donald Trump hitting his numbers just about everywhere. I haven't found many places yet where he isn't hitting where he wants to be in terms of the 538 benchmarks or in terms of the history. The turnout machine, even if it wasn't on the ground the same way it was for the Democrats, seems to have been working, at least in these initial numbers in Michigan and elsewhere.
Let's get right to Juju Chang. She's in Detroit for us. And Juju, President Biden won. This was his biggest win of the swing states, about 54,000 votes. And obviously considered part of this blue wall that Kamala Harris is trying to keep.
And they're trying to shore up the cracks in the blue wall, David, absolutely. You know, the Secretary of State was here just moments ago telling us that she believes that votes here will be tabulated between midnight and 6 a.m. throughout Michigan. Now, we spoke earlier to the Macomb County clerk, and he believes it's a big night for Team Trump. That said, we spoke earlier to the COO of the Detroit Board of Elections, and he said, look, we're on pace to have the count tonight. And we believe there's going to be turnout of more than 50% in Detroit, which is a number that might be of interest to the Harris campaign. Now, the Detroit election official says there's been no chaos, no pandemonium, no banging on the windows like there was 4 years ago. He says he jokingly said he thought he heard them singing Kumbaya in the hall.
Right, Juju Chang in Michigan will be checking back in with you, Juju. I'm looking at North Carolina, less than 100,000 votes, about a 70,000 vote margin between the two candidates. Stay tuned here. The numbers are just coming in. They're just getting interesting. Your local news standing by. We'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
Kara Phillips. You are watching ABC News, and the race to the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. More polls closed across the country, including 6 of the 7 battleground states, and we are seeing results come in from several states now. ABC News projecting Trump will win North Dakota, South Dakota, Louisiana, and Texas. ABC News also projects Harris will win Delaware, Maryland, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. As for electoral votes, right now, 30 for Harris, 162 to Donald Trump. As you know, to win, a candidate needs 270. In Florida, with 86% of the expected vote reporting, the Florida Abortion Ballot Initiative is projected to fail. It got 57% of the vote. It needed 60% of the vote to pass. The referendum would have put abortion rights into the state constitution. It's the first time since Roe was overturned that abortion rights have been on the ballot, put directly to voters, and failed. Let's get to our Deputy Political Director, Avery Harper. Avery, exit poll numbers starting to come in as well as voters begin to fill in their ballots. What are some of the key concerns?
Right, when we look at some of this preliminary exit poll data, what we see is that the state of democracy has actually edged out the economy as the #1 issue that voters care about as they consider who to vote for, followed by the economy. Abortion, we see there in the middle with 14% of voters saying that. Immigration, which has been an issue that the Trump campaign has really leaned into, falling there at the 4th slot at 11% and foreign policy at the end.
Wow. All right, Avery Harper, thank you so much. We'll talk through the night. Let's head to Arizona now, where we find ABC's Elizabeth Schulze. Elizabeth, you're in Phoenix, which is in Maricopa County, the most populous county in the state. The polls there have now closed. What can you tell us about early voting there so far?
So Carolina was record voting across the state of Arizona, and here in Maricopa County, now that the polls have closed, they will start to tabulate those ballots. About 60% of all of Arizona's ballots will be counted here. We asked the Secretary of State today how long he expects that process will take. He said this could take 10 to 13 days, so the results could still take some time here. A reminder that President Biden just narrowly won this state by 10,000 votes back in 2020. That was the first time that a Democrat won Arizona since 1996. So this is expected to be a tight race, but we are hearing from an official from the Arizona GOP. They're optimistic about turnout today from Republicans. We're really going to be closely watching those independent voters here, Kira.
All right, Elizabeth Schulze there in Phoenix for us. Thank you so much. All right, so Avery, let's talk about the economy. It was interesting looking at how the various concerns for voters in the exit polls fanned out there. The economy clearly at the top there. I was actually surprised at how low immigration stood, considering all the coverage we've been doing on both of those issues for the past couple of weeks.
Right, we know that perceptions of the economy have been something that have been driving folks to head to the polls. And when you look at this exit poll data, preliminary exit poll data that we're seeing, you see that 32% say the condition of the economy is excellent or good, and 67% say not so good or poor. And that is something that the Trump campaign has been leaning into.
Avery, thank you. I'm Kara Phillips. Stay with ABC News. Our team is bringing you election results all throughout the night. And this just in, go ahead. New York for Harris. Okay, they're projected by ABC News. There you go. News happening by the second. Stay with us. We'll continue to bring you all the latest results throughout the night.
Live, Peyton Manning and Lainey Wilson host the CMA Awards.
It's ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
This is an ABC News special. Election Night in America. Who will be the next president of the United States? From ABC News headquarters in New York, here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to ABC News Live Election Night coverage now 9:30 here in the East. The polls have now closed in 41 states across this great country, including 6 of the 7 battleground states. The battle will close in just about 30 minutes. At this hour, here are the results we've been reporting so far in Pennsylvania. Again, this is just still underway in these swing states. Pennsylvania, 55% to 43%. Again, we have to look at the counties and what we're talking about when we're looking at that vote still very early. In Michigan, you can see Kamala Harris taking an early lead in Michigan, and in Wisconsin tonight, Donald Trump with the early lead. We're going to dive into where these numbers are actually coming from in just a moment. We're also tracking Georgia. We're tracking North Carolina and Arizona at this hour. No numbers from Arizona, though the polls have now closed. In Georgia, Donald Trump holding on to that lead. Looks like it's now just about more than 100,000 votes, widening his lead and holding firm. In North Carolina, still a close race. And again, there's some outstanding vote in some of the Democratic areas. We'll dig deeper into that in just a moment. New York, we can now project. ABC News projecting that the state of New York, 28 electoral votes. Kamala Harris has won the state of New York. In Rhode Island, 4 electoral votes. Vice President Harris wins the 4 votes there. Former President Donald Trump winning the state of Louisiana, 8 electoral votes. He picks up from Louisiana. Let's go right to the map, the race to 270. Kamala Harris winning 6 states in Washington, D.C., 62 electoral votes. Donald Trump winning 15 states, 162 electoral votes in the march to 270. We do have a Senate projection. ABC News can report that in the state of New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand will serve a 3rd term. She'll be seeking the 3rd term. She wins it handily tonight. She'll return to the Senate. Let's get right to the team here. Rick, what are you seeing there in North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina is one we have our eyes on because it seems like every serve is being met with a volley as we get into the numbers here. To look at Raleigh, Wake County, that's a place where Kamala Harris needs to be doing very well. She's doing almost exactly what she needs to be doing, and of course, very well in the bluer parts of the Research Triangle area. But when you get out into Trump country, it looks like Trump numbers, and it's really remarkable to see these numbers tracking how close they are, within a 10th of percentage point of our 538 numbers, and just around within a percentage point or so of what we've seen in the past with past Democrats. We've been talking a little bit about Nash County, we're up to almost 90% reporting there, in what's something of a bellwether county, a potential swing county. Biden was able to eke out a victory here. Trump is now on the other side of a potential win in that part of the state. So it's really interesting because you can see the candidate strategies in action with Harris seemingly effectively driving up the vote in some more liberal areas. We're waiting on a lot of vote right here in Mecklenburg County. That is Charlotte. We're about 10% in right now. Too early to really draw too much into what is a big part of the state, but an area where Democrats have had turnout problems in the past.
Yeah, only 10% of the vote in. What's the benchmark she needs to be getting there?
Yeah, she needs to be getting about 6. Let's look at the number. She's with 67%. She's at 63 again. It depends on the vote type right now. But we don't really have a lot to say about it yet. But that's going to be key if she's going to overcome that deficit of now 115,000 votes with about a little more than half of the vote in.
Let's look at Georgia. What do we see?
Yeah, so Georgia's trending a little bit worse, at least in our numbers right now for Harris. 210,000. Trump seems to be in a pretty good position right now, but we're still waiting on so much vote. But just to take you around a little bit, the Atlanta metro area, we've seen a significant amount of vote in Fulton County. It's a place where Harris has to be winning big, and she is winning big, almost exactly hitting her benchmark. DeKalb County, again, almost exactly at that number. Places where she's racking up big numbers because she's then bleeding support elsewhere in the state, including in some of the outlying suburbs of Atlanta. Donald Trump doing very well in a lot of these places and just bringing up these 19, 20,000, 40,000 votes in all these different counties across the state. And that's why you see now this edge beginning to emerge of 211,000 votes. Gwinnett County is going to be very important here. It's about 8-9% of the entire state. Right now, Harris up about 60-40 there with only about 60% of the vote in. We're going to look at this all night. These are where we think the votes are. Those big blue dots seem to suggest there's a lot there, but all those red dots add up as well. So there's still a good amount of Republican vote. And again,
just explain that again for the audience looking. The size of those dots actually is proportional to the amount of vote that we believe is still outstanding.
Yeah, for every county, with some of them are blue counties, some of them red counties, some are more purple. And so if it's a 50-50 county, you're not going to get a lot of vote edge one way or the other. But this is really Atlanta, the suburbs. Some of these overlapping dots are so big because the vote share is so large in that area. Some of the smaller blue dots, all of it adds up to a lot of vote that is still out. But we're edging up to about 3/4 of the vote in. We've seen nights like this develop where it gets harder and harder to make up a gap.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of what you just showed us shows Kamala Harris hitting her benchmark or actually surpassing it marginally, but then Donald Trump actually doing even better than what he had to do in some of these rural counties in Georgia. Ryan, what are you hearing from the Trump campaign?
I'm hearing that they're still very excited about what they're seeing. They're cautiously optimistic about North Carolina. They feel like there's not enough there for the Harris campaign to make up the ground that they need to make up. They're happy about what's happening in Ohio, that they seem to be up by 10 at this point. And historically, Ohio's been in our party sort of a mental issue where if we're not winning by 10 in Ohio, we're worried about everything else, and that number looks good. There is some, they're nervous about Pennsylvania. There's a lot of vote that's out there. They know that there is a ton of early vote that hasn't even been touched. So there's no arrogance about that, but now all the attention is going to start moving to that blue wall. Virginia being tied is another issue that is getting them excited. They weren't expecting Virginia to be tied. There's 60% of the vote in, I think, about now in Virginia. The fact that that's tied and in the suburbs, Trump did not do that badly around Washington, D.C.
Could be a signal for other states. The Harris campaign not expecting to lose Virginia, but Rick, can you show us the map that gives us the proportional look at the outstanding vote in Virginia?
Yeah, and look, there's plenty of Democratic vote. This is the Washington, D.C. suburbs. This is Richmond in the area. This is Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. Lots of Democrats. Some of these, though, are lighter blue, which means it could be more of a mix. And we still have a lot of vote left from Roanoke and from other redder parts of the state. But, yeah, you add it all up, and Rice is right to point this out, because right now there's something going on where you're just not seeing the kind of numbers that you would expect in some of these suburban areas. Biden in Prince William County, 62% of the vote. Hillary Clinton, 58%. So Harris is down now to 57%. So she's still winning, just not winning by the same kind of numbers. And when you balance that out with the redder parts of the state, where you see Donald Trump racking up the big numbers over and over again, that's how you get as close as it is right now in Virginia. And just remember how close Virginia is to North Carolina and Georgia. We're talking about similar types of voters. So the fact that they're battling it out in Virginia shouldn't really be a surprise. A lot of the folks that live there are seeing some of the same media, they're seeing some of the same advertising, and they may be responding to some of the same cross pressures. Similarly, as we talk about the blue wall that Ryan was mentioning in the upper Midwest, a lot of those voters have overlap as well.
Which is why Ryan says they're not getting ahead of themselves either, because Pennsylvania so far, at least at this point, looks like it has some promising signs for the Harris campaign in their effort to try to reach suburban voters like in the collar counties around Philadelphia, which you had showed us. She seems to be doing well, and in Allegheny County as well. Where do those numbers stand?
Yeah, so I show you Allegheny, which is Pittsburgh. That is just a Democratic stronghold right now. It used to be even stronger Democratic, but we've seen the numbers get a little bit higher with the last couple of elections, and with about half the vote in right now in the Pittsburgh area. Yeah, the numbers are getting hit. The 538 benchmark would suggest she's running ahead of where she needs to go. And yeah, you mentioned the Philadelphia suburbs. Still not a lot of vote in places like Chester County, but Harris is getting at least close to her numbers. Montgomery County hitting a little bit above it right now. And Bucks, I'm still watching, because that kind of margin, if that carries through the night, would be really surprising and would bode well for her chances. We're still waiting on about 3/4 of the vote in Philadelphia, which is just a monster in that state. There's so much vote out there, and as you'd expect, Harris is carrying and handling 112,000 votes that she's getting out of the city of Philadelphia. That's almost it's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the margin she has in the entire state right now.
Let's swing over to Rachel Scott, the other board. And Rachel, you'll be in the Senate race. I know Bob Casey looking to hold on to his seat, famous name in Pennsylvania. Obviously, his father in politics as well, many years ago. Dave McCormick challenging him. And where does that race stand? I saw it a moment ago. It looked like he was underperforming Harris in some respects, at least in Allegheny County.
Yeah, let's take a look at where it stands statewide right now. This is how we can compare how the presidential candidates are doing at the top of the ticket to the Senate candidates in this race. So you have Vice President Kamala Harris statewide, 52%, again, very early, 30% of the vote in right now. Bob Casey also at 52. You mentioned the area around Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. Let's take a look at where that stands and how these two compare here. You have Vice President Kamala Harris, 65%, Bob Casey, 65% as well. Also going to be looking at Scranton, He's from Scranton, home to President Joe Biden. You can see he's performing a little bit better than Vice President Kamala Harris here. And the final stretch, David, Bob Casey has been running ads in this state, really painting himself as an independent that bucked President Biden when it came to tariffs and also sided with former President Donald Trump. He has been trying to find a middle ground here because he is fully aware that if Vice President Kamala Harris does not do well here, it could impact his race as well.
Let's swing it out to Matt Gutman, who's on the ground in Pennsylvania. Matt, what are you hearing?
I'm hearing that it looks like Senator Casey has a very good chance here. I mean, from the beginning, Governor Josh Shapiro and others have told me that he is the most likely to win here. His father was a governor. He is a scion of a very famous family here, also from Scranton, like former President Biden. And McCormick's got a big knock against him, and that is that he hasn't really lived in the state. He lives mostly in Connecticut, and that is something that apparently has affected voters here. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about, and that is the results and the timing of the results, David. I spoke to Governor Shapiro, and he's been very adamant about accuracy being first, also the vote being safe and fair. But officials here understand that they are in a race against the clock. You remember back in 2020, it took almost 5 days to tabulate the vote here. That delta between the elections and the results left all of this space for rumor and conspiracy theory, which was jumped upon by the Trump administration. That's happening again already. But this time, they aim to do it much more quickly. They have more voting machines, although they still are not allowed to pre-process the mail-in ballots until 7 a.m. on Election Day. But the state funding that goes to the counties that's tied to their election funding stipulates that they cannot stop counting once they have started until they are completely done. So they've got rotating crews going round the clock to count the votes. Most of the counties tell me they hope to have it done at some point tomorrow afternoon. One thing to look at is Erie County. At last glance, they have about only 1% in. Officials there telling me there is massive voter turnout. And because there was a snafu with their mail-in ballots, the vendor sent them to the wrong addresses. Some people didn't get them. I was told that counting the mail-in ballots could take an additional days, possibly even weeks. So that could take a long time. Of course, Erie County is a pivotal swing county that has swung from side to side over the past several elections, Dave.
Yeah, one of those boomerang counties we're going to be watching very closely here in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. Matt, thanks so much. Let's go to the wall here. You can see the three blue wall states right up there right now. Kamala Harris with a lead early in the night in all three of those states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all about the same margin, by the way, 52 to 47 Pennsylvania, a similar lead in Michigan, and with 18% of the vote in Wisconsin, 51-47. Lindsay, I know we're getting some exit poll data from voters, how independents are breaking in these so-called three blue wall states or Rust Belt states, as they're called.
And obviously the independent voter, highly coveted by both campaigns. It's not voting so well for Kamala Harris for those independent voters in Pennsylvania. You see 24% of those voters, pretty significant amount, about a quarter of those voters in Pennsylvania identify as independent, and they are breaking by 6 points for Donald Trump. He actually is doing 6 points better this election than he did in 2020. But Michigan and Wisconsin, a little bit more hope for the Harris campaign. She's actually leading when it comes to the independent voters by 3 points compared to Donald Trump. And Wisconsin, more the same there, where she's leading by 4 points with the independent votes. But Donald Trump doing 5 points better with the independent voters in Wisconsin in 2020. He's doing 1 point better in Michigan when it comes to the independent voter.
Mary Bruce, this makes me think of you and your reporting these last couple of days, the Harris campaign telling you that this was going to be very close, and they said they knew that.
And that is what we are seeing here tonight. Very close, still very tight, and a long way to go. I mean, that is the message coming out of the Harris campaign tonight. I think they are encouraged and buoyed by what they are seeing in Pennsylvania. I think, when it comes to Georgia, I'm hearing that they are pointing particularly to the suburban support that they're getting there. They say they are tracking slightly above expectations among suburban early voters in Georgia. They also are pointing to the rural turnout in Georgia. They say they're not seeing signs of some surging rural turnout. They, of course, are waiting for results from those larger rural counties. But look, they have said all along their most straightforward path is to win the blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They've put a lot of energy and effort into those three states. But again, they always said this is going to be a tight race that was going to be won in the margins.
Look, there are clearly troubling signs for Democrats throughout the Sun Belt, whether it's in the non-battleground states like Virginia or like Florida, or whether it's in the battleground states Georgia and North Carolina, look, anybody can still win there, but you don't see any sign that Kamala Harris is running away with anything. But I just heard from a top Democrat who was following this as close as anybody, it was always going to come down to the blue wall. Everything else is gravy. Think about what that means, David. If those are the only states that she wins in the battleground, you get to 270 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. She wins because she won a single electoral vote in one of two states that divides their votes, the city of Omaha in Nebraska. And that's what they're looking at right now. I mean, we have a long way to go. But that ultimately is looking more and more like the path that Kamala Harris is going to need to get elected president.
And part of that coalition, if she hopes to get to 270 tonight, includes the independent voters. I would think that seeing the way they're breaking in Pennsylvania, at least early in the preliminary exits, is not terribly encouraging, though independents, Lindsay was pointing out, Michigan and Wisconsin are breaking her way, again, according to the preliminary exit polls. And in fact, we've got some great new numbers coming in from Wisconsin that we can dig into and really see how both campaigns are doing here right after the break. Don't go away. ABC News Live coverage of the presidential race continues. Wisconsin up on deck here. We're going to look at the numbers from that state in just a moment.
Coming up, we're live in the battleground zones as Election Night 2024 continues on ABC.
Suspect is on the roof, requesting backup.
2 daring rescues, and then down to 1 new hero.
I can do it. I'm his big brother.
If we don't try this, we might not get to him in time. 911, all new Thursday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Harris Walls, Trump face, Election Night 2024 continues. Here again, David Mueller.
Here's something to keep in mind. 4 of the last 6 presidential elections, the state of Wisconsin was decided by less than 1 percentage point, which is why you feel like that pit in your stomach, no matter what side you're on tonight, as you look at the map coming together, a very competitive race, and it would look like Rick. If the Harris campaign has a path to 270, it's looking more and more like it's got to be through that blue wall, the Rust Belt, and Wisconsin. Let's take a look at where those numbers stand tonight. It's funny when you think back, Biden won it by 21,000 votes 4 years earlier. Donald Trump had won it by 23,000 votes. This is a state that does go back and forth. It's sort of the bellwether state of the country.
Yeah, and these are the first numbers we're seeing tonight, about a quarter of the vote in. Big caveat, we don't know exactly what vote it is. We think a lot of this is actually election day vote. We don't think we've seen any of the early vote from Milwaukee, which of course is the biggest city. Starting with the way the Democrats look, they have to get big numbers out of Milwaukee for starters, and that seems to be happening so far. Harris pretty close to what we think she would need to do in the city of Milwaukee to be competitive across the state with about 40% of the vote in. Madison is just a huge vote engine for Democrats. She's getting close to that 538 benchmark, but not quite there, running a little bit below Biden's numbers from 4 years ago. But here's some big news, and hat tip to Reince Priebus, Mr. Wisconsin over there, for highlighting some of this. In Kenosha, which is a swingier part of the state, Donald Trump carried it just by 50.7% last time around. He's up 7 points. Harris down 5 points from where she was. That's significantly below the benchmark. This is one we've been looking for as well in the western part of the state, South County. Again, Harris a little below the benchmark. And up here, Door County, this is one that people love to talk about as the classic bellwether type county. Donald Trump right now a little bit up in this county. The numbers are small. We're not talking about huge counties, but as the numbers come in, we're seeing Trump continue to hit numbers. Waukesha County, which is in the suburbs there, Trump just slightly below the benchmark. A lot of votes still to go. Again, we've got less than a third of it in, and a lot of it is going to be the early vote. But it looks like it's going to be a tight race there. And you're right, David, especially if Georgia fades a little bit toward Donald Trump, and North Carolina trends there as well. That really leaves Harris with that path that you guys were just talking about, that includes Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all of which he's leading now, at least numerically.
But it's not an easy path, if that's your only path. And Wisconsin, I took note of all the counties you just showed. She's almost hitting her benchmark, but Donald Trump is surpassing his benchmark. They're small counties. We're not talking about huge amounts of vote, but in every one of those counties you just showed, Donald Trump was slightly above his benchmark in each of those Wisconsin counties. Let's go to Deborah Roberts, who's on the ground in Wisconsin. Deborah, what are authorities telling you there?
Hey, David. Well, once again, they're expecting that Wisconsin will keep us on the edge of our seats until late into the night because, as you mentioned, those absentee ballots tend to come in a little bit later, and that happens in Milwaukee. They get a lot of those absentee ballots. But where I am here tonight in Madison, which is a university town, might be the one place that Harris may be able to pick up a little bit of good news because the University of Wisconsin is hearing those young voters, those first-time voters tell me today that they're really energized. I spent the morning at University of Wisconsin in the classroom of Professor Allison Crash. She teaches a presidential rhetoric class, and the students there told me they became more energized over the last couple of weeks because they just didn't like what they were hearing from the Trump campaign. Also, I should tell you that this particular city has just seen tremendous growth over the last few years, and a lot of those folks who have moved in here have been highly educated, blue-leaning voters, so this is becoming a much deeper blue part of the state, too. So that might cut into some of those margins that Trump might have in those red counties. So this might be the place where Harris might find a little bit of good news with those youth voters up around the country. They've been standing in lines today, waiting to vote. So we'll see what it actually produces as the night goes on. But waiting for those absentee ballots to be processed, that is the thing that takes so long. So that will keep us sort of waiting throughout the night. But they tell us that it's moving along smoothly. They had a small snafu earlier, but it was just a small technical glitch. They think that's going to move along. So Milwaukee and, of course, Madison will probably deliver well for her. And the big question is going to be how big? Because, as you said, 20,000 votes or so for Biden last time. Can she do better than that? That's what she's going to have to probably do to feel solid here in Wisconsin. David?
Deborah Roberts in Madison. Deborah, appreciate it. 28% of the vote in. Kamala Harris up by about 41,000 votes. Ryan's got about a minute before we hit a break here. What do you make of what we saw? I saw Donald Trump surpassing his benchmarks that he needed to ever so slightly, but in each one of those counties Rick showed.
Yeah, absolutely. When Rick showed Kenosha, Wisconsin, where I grew up, that always was a Democrat town. It's where Chrysler American Motors was. 57% is huge. He was at 50% in 2020, about 47% in 2016. The key for Wisconsin right now, though, is Madison, Dane County, that blue in the middle. If Donald Trump can stay above 24%, I think Kamala Harris is going to have a tough time. The difference in 2016 and 2020 was about 80,000 votes, which was a difference, it was 1 percentage point, and he's.
Right now, votes are being counted, and tomorrow, GMA is right there with the morning's first news and
Breaking developments from our powerhouse political team.
tomorrow morning.
When the story matters most.
A special edition of Good Morning America with the election coverage you need. A detective and a waiter partners.
Oh man.
Jeez. Solving cases, catching bad guys.
Can I place an order to go, please?
Well, close.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. You are watching ABC News and the race to the White House. ABC News now projecting Trump will win North Dakota, South Dakota, and Texas. ABC News also projecting Harris will win Colorado, Illinois, and New York. New York coming in 28 electoral votes. Here's each candidate and where they stand right now. 91 going to Harris, 162 to Donald Trump. As you know, to win, candidate needs 270. And one more note from New York, the Equal Rights Proposition, which adds new anti-discrimination protections to the state's constitution, is projected to pass. New York is one of the 10 states with abortion-related initiatives on the ballot. Let's check in now on battleground Pennsylvania. We see Kamala Harris at 50%, Donald Trump 49.1. It's close, 41% of the vote that's in. Let's head to Matt Gutman now. He's in Philly tonight. Matt, we're seeing roughly 22% of the vote now. Vice President Kamala Harris seems to be holding on to her lead over the former president. As we know, Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes of any swing state, Matt.
19 of them, Kira, and the math doesn't work for either candidate unless they win Pennsylvania. And Kamala Harris jumped out to a very big and early lead. That has dwindled to what we are seeing right now. And this is why there's so much focus tonight on the count, when it will be done. Governor Josh Shapiro telling me 2 days ago and coming out again saying, we aim first to be accurate. That is the most important. But everybody knows here that there is this dissonance at play. They've got to be fast and accurate. In 2020, it took them 5 days to tabulate the entire vote. They now hope to do it in a much shorter amount of time. All the counties here have committed to not stopping the count until they are fully done. Every vote is tabulated. Kira.
I'm Matt Gutman, historic Philadelphia. Thanks, Matt. I'm Kira Phillips. Glad you're with us tonight. I hope you'll stay with ABC News. Our team is bringing you election results all throughout the night, led by David Beer. Don't go far. Our race for the White House coverage continues.
We shared a strange, unusual experience, but seeing you here tonight just opens my heart up again.
Welcome to the very first ever Golden Bachelorette Men Tell All.
I didn't expect to be that famous. I love these guys. They're friends for life.
We all came looking for love with Joan, but we got this, which is incredible, really.
We'll take you there.
10 p.m. in the east, 7 p.m. in the west. Polls are now closed in 44 states, including the swing state of Nevada, with its 6 electoral votes. As those numbers start coming in, we'll go right back to the Nevada board. At this hour, all 7 battleground states are now closed, and ABC News can take a look at the numbers coming in from each one. Georgia, 79% of the vote is in. They said they would have the vote in tonight. Kamala Harris behind Donald Trump in that state. We'll dive in whether or not she can make that up anywhere in Georgia. Also, North Carolina tonight, Kamala Harris behind Donald Trump. He leads 52 to 46, 16 electoral votes on the line, 66% of the vote in. We'll dive into where that vote remains. In Pennsylvania at this hour, Kamala Harris holding on to a very slim lead in the very important state, Keystone State, 19 electoral votes. Very difficult to win the White House without the state of Pennsylvania. As you can see, about 43% of the vote in at this hour. Kamala Harris with the slightest of leads there. In Michigan at this hour, another battleground state, part of that blue wall that the Democrats are hoping to keep, 15 electoral votes. Kamala Harris with a lead over former President Trump, 466,000 votes to his 419,000, just 16% of the vote in at this hour. Wisconsin, we were looking at a moment ago. Wisconsin, the numbers starting to come in tonight. Very close race there, about a point between them. And as I mentioned, 4 out of the last 6 presidential elections decided in that state by less than a point. Arizona tonight, another key battleground state. The numbers not in yet, though. The polls have closed. 11 electoral votes on the line there. We do have states. ABC News is ready to project at this hour. Let's take a look. Utah tonight, 6 electoral votes going to former President Donald Trump. Montana, the 4 electoral votes going to Trump there. We're going to watch that Senate race very closely. The Democrat John Tester trying to hold on, and state Trump has now won repeatedly. Colorado, Kamala Harris wins the state of Colorado. 9 electoral votes goes to the vice president. So take a look at the map. The road to 270. Kamala Harris winning 7 states in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump winning 17 states. 172 electoral votes for him, up to 91 for Kamala Harris at this hour. Our coverage of the 2024 presidential election continues right now.
This is an ABC News special. The time has finally come. Right now, all across America, votes are being counted. Who will be your next president on this historic night with the stakes so high? Live from ABC News election headquarters in New York City. Now reporting, David Miller.
Welcome back, ABC News live election night headquarters here in New York City, and we are getting not only numbers in, but more exit polling data from the key battlegrounds. Lindsay, what do you have?
Well, so interesting enough, the Harris campaign has really doggedly pursued the Latino vote. We've seen that really ratchet up in particular in recent weeks. Donald Trump equally. He was in Pennsylvania recently, just last week, and he said, I love the Latinos. He was in New Mexico a few days ago. He said, I love the Hispanics. And it really appears that there is some appeal there for the Latino voters when it comes to Donald Trump. If you look at the race in Nevada in particular, the Latino vote making up 17% of the electorate there. Here we go, 48% going for Kamala Harris there in Nevada, 46% for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is actually doing 4 points better. Actually, I'm sorry, that's in Arizona. Harris is doing 4 points worse than Biden in Arizona, and Trump doing 4 points better than he did in 2020. If we want to look at that board there in Arizona, Kamala Harris getting 55% of the Latino vote. They make up more than 25% of the population in Arizona. Donald Trump getting 41%. But in both cases, he's doing much better. Trump 11 points better than he did in 2020 in Nevada, and again, 4 points better than he did in Arizona in 2020.
And this is exactly what the Trump campaign wanted to do, was to peel away some of the Latino support that President Biden got 4 years ago. And Martha, you traveled through Nevada and through the Sun Belt, and what did you hear?
Well, I think what I heard was surprising in some ways. I mean, you think, oh, the Latino vote is going to go to the Democrats. Absolutely not. I mean, that's not the impression you got on the ground. You had unions out there canvassing for Kamala Harris, but it all came back to the voters I spoke to the economy. And even those Democrats who were out canvassing for Kamala Harris knew that was an issue. Like, how do you explain to people the economy that people trust Donald Trump more on that? And they said, well, we tell them that it just takes time. So that message was not really resonating. Nevada has the highest unemployment rate of any state in the country. They were devastated after COVID. And that is the issue. You know, you can talk about exaggeration. You can talk about them calling Puerto Ricans garbage. can talk about all those things, but it came back to the economy. They can hear lies, they can hear mistruths, they can hear exaggerations, but their truth is their grocery bills, their gas bills, and that's what it came back to on many, many people I interviewed.
And the high cost of housing.
Exactly, very, very high cost of rents and immigration, of course. And you could talk to Latino voters. There was one man, he said, I don't care about any of that other stuff. Donald Trump is going to be best for the border. This is a man who came in to the country 50 years ago illegally. He is now a citizen. He doesn't want any more migrants, and that's what he's voting for.
Yeah, really interesting. And part of what Lindsay was showing us, I mean, she still is leading among Latino voters, but not by the margin that President Biden did 4 years ago. And that's going to be very concerning for the Democrats and the Harris campaign, Mary.
Yeah, look, I would just remind over and over again that they had said from the very beginning, and they're saying again tonight, their most straightforward path is through those blue wall states. And when you look at what we're seeing coming in, that certainly seems to still be the case, and I suspect is still their hope. You know, the Harris campaign is well aware of all of those issues, especially in Nevada. It's why she, unveiled her housing plan in that state. She knew that she had to hammer home the issue of the economy and make clear that that was going to be her top priority, that lowering the cost of groceries was going to be the very first thing, her very first priority when she gets into office. She always said she would pass, if elected, this big economic package of bills to do just that. The question is whether that message got across and was enough.
Rick Klein, what's the blue wall looking like at this point?
Yeah, we've seen some numbers come in that shifted the lead, again, numerically, because it just has to do with the pace of vote. But right now, Donald Trump with a 33,000 vote edge. We've got a lot of rural votes.
This is Pennsylvania.
This is Pennsylvania, yes. You asked earlier about Wilkes-Barre, Luzerne County. That has flipped red, at least as of now, with 57% of the vote in. Donald Trump racking up some numbers there in an area where Democrats had some hopes to build things up. You can also see what's starting to happen in the western part of the state. We've got some significant numbers north of Pittsburgh and Butler County. This is a place where Donald Trump is coming close to his benchmark number. Really, this is a function of a lot of vote coming in the redder parts of the state. We still have a lot to go in Philadelphia. That's the kind of by far the biggest city. We're seeing Delco go very strongly for Kamala Harris. She's outperforming where she would need to be, also outperforming where Joe Biden was. And same story up through Montgomery. And this is still an interesting one, Bucks County. A lot of folks are keyed into that. A lot of votes still to go. Unclear exactly what kind of vote that is, but at least now Kamala Harris outperforming that benchmark. So just a long night to go, but we're getting close to half the votes in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this would appear to be her strongest state so far as her benchmark performance, at least meeting the 538 average of where these candidates need to be. Donald Trump, in a number of the counties you just showed, slightly below the benchmark, though getting very close to it.
Yeah.
Which explains why the vote is so close right now. 46% of the vote in. Donald Trump with a very slight lead in Pennsylvania. And you were looking at the Latino vote in Pennsylvania and some of the counties where they live, and wondering if this 11th hour push by the Harris campaign to try to reach out to Latinos would actually work.
Yeah, and as Martha was talking about what she saw there in Nevada, I was thinking about what I saw personally here in Pennsylvania. This is Berks County, which includes Reading. Donald Trump has a campaign office here. This is a county that has a large Hispanic and Latino population. Reading is 72% Latino. This is one of those counties where we are going to see this split screen, because you have Donald Trump's rhetoric. You have that rally after Madison Square Garden where that speaker compared Puerto Rico to an island of garbage. This is also a county where the economy just matters so much. They're still dealing with high poverty. Let's take a look at where Donald Trump is here. I will tell you, he's already meeting his benchmark with 76% of the vote in. You can see where he was just 4 years ago, 53%. He's already there. We're still waiting on a large amount of election day vote as well as early by mail vote as well. And then again, right here, David, he's already performing really well here. While he was campaigning here in Reading, Vice President Kamala Harris was in Allentown. This is Lehigh County. You can see just how well she's doing here. Right now, she's ahead by 6,000 votes or so, but still a lot of vote left to be counted, 43% right now.
Thanks, Rachel. Rick, one of the things that's very telling is the map with the sort of circular diagram that shows you where the vote still remains. Can you just show us in Pennsylvania this hour where the vote still has to be tallied? I want to take this over to Donna and Ryan's, the one that shows the outstanding vote.
Yeah, you can see that's Philadelphia in the suburbs. A good amount of vote in Pittsburgh. So when you see a purple dot like that, that's more of a battleground county. So it's probably not going to advantage either candidate. But there's a significant amount of Republican votes still outstanding as well. It looks like it's going to be a close state.
The battle for Pennsylvania, Donna. What do you make of it?
First of all, I've taken my meditation early because, once again, Democrats are going to come in late. They're going to come in late in Pennsylvania. And clearly in Georgia, what's happening is that Democrats are not overperforming, and DeKalb and Cobb and Fulton, you have to overperform because Donald Trump is doing 4 points better in some of the rural areas. So again, Democratic cities tend to come in late. I'm seeing that pattern once again. I have, good information that Philadelphia is going to come in much stronger than in 2020. And by the way, in some of these areas, you can compare apples to apples, but Kamala Harris has had to build a different coalition. So I'm also looking in some of these suburbs, if the issue of abortion, the threat of democracy, if it worked in those areas in terms of pulling out her vote.
And those are the collar counties around Philadelphia. Can we take another look at that based on Donna's point here, whether or not Harris is having success in those counties, getting the numbers up to where they need to be?
Yeah, for sure. Chester County is a key one there. It's about 5% of the whole statewide total. Not a lot of information in yet. We're seeing Harris run a little bit below where she'd need to do to hold even there. Montgomery County, an outperformance so far, again, with less than a third of the vote in. And I've kept my eye on Bucks throughout the night to try to track this because this is good news if you're the Harris campaign. Delco, similar story. And as Donna said with Philadelphia, one of the interesting little quirks is just how Clinton's vote share actually went down a little bit with Joe Biden. Biden wins the state, but Clinton actually did a little bit better in the city of Philadelphia, even though it was elsewhere in the state that he was able to make up votes. So what kind of coalition is built becomes really important through all of this. You can also look at some of the more battleground, closely divided places. And again, it's hard to know how much of the vote is election day versus vote by mail. There's still a lot of it that is the in-person vote that might shift some of these numbers. These are not horrible numbers. You asked me earlier about Erie County, that boomerang county. Very little of the vote in right now, but this just looks like it's a battle.
A real battle, right? So what do you make of what you're seeing in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think it's going to take a long time. I mean, we're just going to have to be patient with Pennsylvania. They're pretty slow at getting these results in. Even though not as much as 2020, just a boatload of early votes that still need to be counted, a lot in Philadelphia County. So I'm a little bit slow to opine on Pennsylvania, but I do think things are looking very interesting south of Pennsylvania and Virginia still. And I think that's something that there's not getting a lot of attention yet, but I think people are going to start focusing on Virginia.
The closeness of Virginia. Let's take a look, Rick. Where does Virginia stand right now?
Yeah, this is just one of those really strange ones to see a 4,000 vote edge. A lot of votes left in the Democratic areas. Those are our bluer dots, but it's just not. One of the things that strikes me, David, looking at the map as it's filled in so far, the fact that the Democrats are sweating some of the places that should have been safe. We haven't made a projection in New Hampshire. We haven't made a projection in Connecticut, Rhode Island. We talked about earlier, closer than we thought. Of course, Virginia. These are places that Democrats flat out have to win. If
Take us through some of those states. Let's see where New Hampshire stands, because we saw some tightening in the polls leading up to election day.
Yeah, we did. And this is a state that we kind of thought would be called a little earlier in the night because they have a pretty true tradition. Most of the Democratic votes are in the southern part of the state. And again, Harris is leading. The question is going to be really how much she wins by.
Outperforming herself.
Outperforming there. But to me, the fact that we're even talking about states like this tells you how things are at least tipping early in the night. And the southern states, clearly there's an edge right now in Georgia and North Carolina. North Carolina attracting a lot, 230,000 vote margin. That's hard to make up when we're at 70% of the vote. The thing that is keeping it, though, out of anyone's win column is Mecklenburg County. That's Charlotte. Kamala Harris is winning there. She's not hitting the 538 benchmark number, but you want to see a really big dot emerge. There it is. And that's almost 500,000 votes that are still out in the Charlotte area. But if she's winning at 60-40 instead of 68-20 or 68-30, that means you're just not getting as many votes out of it, and that makes it hard to catch up against that number.
No question about that. We're going to check in with Trump headquarters in Florida. We're going to check in with Harris headquarters, see what the mood is on the ground at this point in the night. And we're going to keep digging into these Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, because that appears to be the path as we continue in the night, at least for the Democrats to keep this alive. As Rick Klein just points out, and smartly so, the reason North Carolina can't be called is because of the outstanding vote in Charlotte, but it is a Democratic area. But given the margin between the two, it might be really difficult to make that up. So we're going to keep our eyes on the map. We'll get right back to it right after the break.
Your voice, your vote. Election Night 2024. continues in a moment on ABC. Friday night, a firefighter gunned down in his own driveway. Stunning true crime.
Every step was shocking.
As it unfolds.
Just when you thought you heard the most shocking part, there was another part.
Fire and Vice 2020, Friday night on ABC. You're watching ABC News live coverage of Election Night 2024. Here again, David Newell.
Welcome back to ABC News Election Night headquarters in New York. We have some races to call this hour. We can project that in Mississippi, the winner of that race, former President Donald Trump, picks up 6 electoral votes in Mississippi. He also wins Ohio, 17 electoral votes. Used to be a battleground state. Trump has won Ohio before. He wins it again tonight. Of course, we're watching the Ohio Senate race right now. The Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown seeking a 4th term, trailing businessman Bernie Moreno, who's never run before. Colombian roots. He leads by almost 5 points here. It's going to be a difficult race to make up that kind of ground with 76% of the vote in. We're going to keep our eye on that. We do have another race to call, a race that makes history tonight in Maryland. Voters have elected Democrat Angela Alsobrooks to serve in the Senate. Republican Larry Hogan, the popular governor there, had been challenging her for that open seat. Angela Alsobrooks becomes the next senator from the state of Maryland, and Lindsay Davis, she makes history, and a lot of history made tonight. She'll be the second Black woman elected to the Senate on this election.
And we're talking about Carol Moseley Braun and Kamala Harris. Obviously, prior to this day, in our country's nearly 250-year history, we've only had 2 Black women ever elected to the U.S. Senate, and tonight you have 2 more. What's really significant, I think, to put this into broader perspective, is we've still never had a Black female govern a state in this country. And so tonight the Democratic Party is asking American citizens to do something that they haven't even done on a state level. They're asking to vote for this woman to run and rule and reign over this entire country, which it just really puts in perspective that we're just now getting to this point of having 4 Black women elected into the Senate. It was interesting when I had a chance to speak with Angela Alsobrooks just last week. She talked about how her family is from South Carolina, and it was because her great-grandfather had been shot by a white sheriff's deputy, but they fled to Maryland, and that's what made her decide that she wanted to be a prosecutor and ultimately get into politics.
And down in Brazil, Angela Alsobrooks has talked about how, as a young prosecutor, she got advice from another prosecutor.
That's right. Vice President Kamala Harris was elected prosecutor in 2004. She mentored Angela Alsobrook, but I also have to take a moment of personal pride. She was my first intern on Capitol Hill. So I'm very excited about that, but she's been a terrific executive. And for a primary campaign, she was outraged almost 10-1, as well as the general election. Look, Larry Hogan is a great guy. People love him in Maryland, but they understood a vote for Mr. Hogan was a vote for Mitch McConnell, a vote for the Supreme Court. Angela had her message focused on the economy, the issue of abortion, because abortion was on the ballot in the great state of Maryland. But she also had a special appeal, I think, to young women across the state. That's going to be the hidden story tonight after my friend next to me finishes boogie-woogie around all of the counties.
It's been a long night ahead, and Rachel Scott, you're looking at the Senate. Not only is this a win for Angela Alsobrook, she makes history, but I flashed up that Ohio Senate race. Sherrod Brown does not look like it's going to be a good night for him there.
Yeah, this is going to be really hard to make up, David, as you already said. 78% of the vote that is already in, and you can see that Moreno is ahead right now by 239,000 votes, roughly compared to Sherrod Brown. You know, I've been studying sort of how he won the last time around. Listen, that was 2018. Donald Trump was not running, and so this is the first time that Sherrod Brown, the last remaining statewide Democrat in this state, is really trying to outrun the top of the ticket. I want you to just pay attention to some of these counties, because these are areas, they're red now, but these were blue in 2018. These are two counties in which Sherrod Brown did really well in 2018. Now they're red. You can see just how well Moreno is doing here. He's ahead by 4,000 votes. Sherrod Brown underperforming where he was in 2018. And you can see Vice President Kamala Harris at 41%. This is obviously a red state here. Sherrod Brown, the last remaining Democrat, if he is able to carve this one out, it would be pretty remarkable here. We're still waiting for a good number of votes here in Franklin County, which is home to Columbus.
What does it say, John, about the shifting nature of not only Ohio, but you're looking at Florida as well? And Sherrod Brown, very popular in that state, obviously not enough to win tonight, but the margin became smaller and smaller each time he ran.
Yeah, and look, this show's really tough night it's shaping up to be for Democrats in the Senate. I mean, the Democrats talked about two seats that they thought they really had a chance to pick up. Florida, Texas, neither one of those looks good. Sherrod Brown, they thought they were going to keep. Looks like he's in real trouble. Tough for Democrats in the Senate.
All right, John, thanks. When we come back here, your local news is standing by. We have new reporting from Donald Trump's campaign headquarters, who's with Donald Trump tonight, what they make of what they're seeing on the board so far, and then we'll focus right back on that.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We're approaching the gate bulletins came in from different directions. So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag is carried. No more debate, USA. I'm David Muir.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
Hey, good morning, America. Good morning, America. Good morning, America. Good morning, America. Good morning, America.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. You are watching ABC News and the race to the White House. We are watching the results roll in. ABC News now projecting Trump will win Mississippi and Ohio. ABC News also projecting Harris will win Illinois and New York. Here's where each candidate stands right now. 91 to Kamala Harris, 195 to the former president. As you know, a candidate needs 270 to win. Let's take a look at some states that we are still waiting to call. Here's the latest out of Wisconsin, where the last two elections were decided by less than 25,000 votes. VP Kamala Harris at 49.1%, the former president at 49.2%. 47% of the vote is in. It is tight. We want to turn now to our Deborah Roberts. She is in Madison, Wisconsin. Deb, we know that election workers there are working hard to process more than 1 million absentee ballots. Let's just talk about what that process looks like.
Well, it's a long process and it's a late process, Kara. We talked to the chairperson of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and she tells us that we can just expect, once again, a long night. Wisconsin is one of those states that doesn't begin to process and tabulate those votes until the morning of Election Day, which is today. And that is really critical when it comes to those absentee ballots. And as you said, a lot of them to tabulate, particularly in Milwaukee, the largest city in this state. And they do this in a very exacting kind of manner where they lay out the votes and they crease them and they process them through the machine, and it just takes a very long time. They had a little bit of a snafu earlier today. They said they've rectified that. They've made up some time, but they expect that it's going to be a late night here in Wisconsin, and those votes might very well determine how much of a margin Harris will have here if she continues on this path to being ahead.
And Madison was also one of a handful of places today that received bomb threats at polling sites. What more can you tell us?
Well, there have been a number of places, as you know, that have had this kind of thing around the country, and there were even reports of people getting phone calls today here in Madison, voters who said that they were very strange calls, people asking personal information, and then these bomb threats at a couple of polling locations, schools that were, of course, closed, but polling locations turned out to be nothing, but once again, still concerning. Election officials say it was just mischief, and they said Ann Jacobs, who is the head of this election commission for the state, said it was just mischief. It was mischief, but bad mischief, but they didn't know what they were up to. So far, a night that seems to be moving right along, but it's going to be a late one.
It sure is. We're glad to have you, Deborah Roberts. Thank you. I'm Kira Phillips. Glad you're all with us tonight. I hope you'll stay with ABC News when we bring you election results all throughout the night, so don't go far. Our coverage of the race to the White House continues.
America's youngest MCs now streaming 24. America's #1 streaming news. Live reporting, breaking new exclusives. Keep streaming with ABC News Live. This is an ABC News special. Election night in America. Who will be the next president of the United States? From ABC News headquarters in New York, here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to ABC News Live Election Night coverage. 10:30 now here in the East, 7:30 in the West. We're 30 minutes away from polls closing in California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho. California, of course, with 54 electoral votes at stake. You're looking at the electoral value, sort of the portion of the map, 270 to win. Let's take you to the floor and we'll show you where things stand at this hour. Kamala Harris with 91 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 201. You need 270 to win. He's picked up 19 states tonight. She's picked up 8 states in Washington, D.C. Let's get right to Trump headquarters, Palm Beach Convention Center. John Santucci, who's covered Donald Trump for us for quite some time. What's the mood there, John? And who's with Donald Trump?
Well, David, you can hear the mood here at the convention center. They're going through results, and the crowd here supporting Donald Trump. Very excited. Donald Trump is not here, David, at this convention center. He's over at Mar-a-Lago, where, David, I'm told he's been gathered with senior staff and family in a war room that's been set up at his club, going through results. And just in the last couple of minutes, David, he actually went into the grand ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, according to reporting from my colleague, Catherine Falders and I, where he actually went around and greeted supporters and donors that are there. Our sources tell us, David, that in addition to donors and club members, he's there with his new campaign surrogates, billionaire Elon Musk and RFK Jr., and in addition to the family, David, who's been advising and campaigning with Donald Trump, his eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric, there with Dad tonight. Barron Trump also there, and a photo, David, that Melania Trump, the former First Lady, just tweeted in the last couple of minutes. Barron, who turned 18 this year, David, casting a vote for his father earlier today. David?
John Santucci with some color inside Trump headquarters there, Palm Beach Convention Center. John, thank you. Let's go right over to Eva Pilgrim. She's at the Kamala Harris headquarters, Howard University in Washington. Eva, what's the mood there?
They're watching the numbers as they come in right now. They are watching a speech from Angela Brooks, who was just declared the winner in that Maryland Senate seat. You can see the crowd here cheering. The flags, those are American flags. Those flags back there, I just want to point out, those are college students in that back area. They're sort of pinned in back there. They've been here since very early. They got here, and they've been cheering and excited. I wish you could hear earlier. There was loud music. Everyone was dancing everywhere they are. You know, we've been speaking with the campaign as they've seen these numbers come in tonight, and they've sort of stuck with what they told us yesterday when we last spoke with them, which was the idea that this event here tonight on Howard's campus, as they watched the election results come in, was going to be an information center for them. They've been very clear with their supporters about how they expect these numbers to come in. The expectation that a lot of the red states would be reporting early and that the blue states would come in later, and to wait for those numbers to come in and for those states to report. And some of those blue states, as we all know, take a little bit longer to come in. And so this isn't an event that they thought they were going to have a result at tonight. This was an opportunity for people to come here. This was an opportunity for them to have a place to get information out, to keep people informed, to keep them, their supporters, calm as they watch these numbers come in tonight. But they are still cautiously optimistic as they wait to see exactly what unfolds here tonight, David.
All right, Eva Pilgrim at Howard University. Eva, thank you. Mary Bruce, you've been in contact with your sources at the campaign. What are they saying about the night? I gather they'll say this was the path that we knew we were working towards, and that means it's a late night.
Bingo. They knew that this was going to be tight. They knew this was going to take a long time. The message coming from the Harris campaign right now is just everybody wait. They are not prepared to say at this point that it's, blue wall or bust. They still feel that they, have a chance in North Carolina and Georgia, that some of those places that are left to report out, maybe more of their supporters. But look, they always knew that this was going to be a very close race and was going to take a lot of time. And we certainly are seeing that play out right now.
We can project another winner here in the state of Iowa. Former President Donald Trump picks up 6 electoral votes in the state of Iowa. This is particularly interesting. We thought Iowa would go to Donald Trump, but then a lot of news in the last few days before this election. The final Des Moines Register poll from J.N. Seltzer, obviously respected political scientist, but there are going to be a lot of questions about what she missed in the poll.
I mean, she was tracking a narrow lead for Kamala Harris. It sent shockwaves throughout the political world. What it could mean for other states, not just Iowa. So to see Iowa coming in for Donald Trump and apparently by a very convincing margins, looks like a serious swing and a miss from a usually reliable pollster.
I'll head over to the big word here with Rick. Let's just dive into some of these Rust Belt states, the so-called blue wall. I'm curious, Wisconsin, we were looking at it a moment ago, and you were showing me a number of the counties. Let's look at the wild counties, which are conservatively Republican leaning, and what she would have to do in those counties around Milwaukee. Waukesha, for example.
Yeah, exactly. The Waukesha County is one of the classic suburban counties with a good history of being going Republican. You see how Kamala Harris did. We also see where she's doing vis-a-vis the 538 benchmark.
So she's outperforming in Waukesha.
That's right. That's right, which is the most Republican of the county. So she's got to like these numbers. You're losing by 45,000 votes. That's never good, but it's better. It's better than the opposite.
But just look at this. This is a 1,000-vote race in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, you do this to us every time. And you're doing it to us again tonight. Between these two candidates, a very close race. Let's look at some of the other counties surrounding Milwaukee.
Yeah, Ozaki is another big one, and we're seeing her just a smidge beyond where she would need to be to make this a 50-50 race. Washington County, she's a little bit below that. Milwaukee, we know that there's a lot of the vote that probably isn't going to be counted for a while. They had to rerun a bunch of the ballots. An 84,000 vote edge here, more than making up for it. We're also looking at Madison. That's a liberal stronghold. But functionally speaking, she's not going to get as many votes here, in all likelihood, as even though she's getting close to the benchmark, she's not going to get as many votes here as Joe Biden did, both in terms of the margin as well as the total number of votes. You have to just kind of rack it up in Dane County and Madison and Milwaukee if you're going to win as a Democrat in Wisconsin.
You're talking about the University of Wisconsin right here.
That's
right. I'm just curious because we haven't talked about this yet tonight. I mean, obviously, it's a blue county, right? Let's just look at the benchmark where Donald Trump needs to be. See, he's outperforming slightly, but that matters on both sides here as they rack up the vote. I'm curious, in university towns, I wonder when we look back, the young male vote from some of these university towns, that was a huge part of the Trump campaign. I don't know if that's going to bear out, but that might be part of the equation in some of these university centers and why she might be just underperforming slightly from where she would need to be having a winning night here. Obviously, she's ahead by 1,800 votes, very close race in Wisconsin, but these are the tiny little margins we're going to be looking at.
And we're seeing that in so many different places, David, too. We're just seeing places where Donald Trump is doing better than his 538 benchmark. Sometimes it's not as dramatic as this is. If you look at the final votes here, Harris isn't even close to where she was last time in Green Bay. A bunch of places where you're just not seeing the Harris numbers and you are seeing the Trump numbers. It's very striking. There's a similar storyline that's playing out throughout Pennsylvania tonight. Again, we're waiting on a lot of vote. We're waiting on all of these Democratic places. It's all there. But it isn't too early to say, look at a county like Schuylkill, where the 538 benchmark would have Harris needing to get 28, 29 points. Not there, not even close. In some of these counties, they're not that big, but they've got most of the vote in already. And you're seeing Donald Trump tick up a little bit from his margins last time around. And that adds up over time, even if these are big places.
No question. Let's look at Allegheny County.
Yeah, Allegheny County, Harris is hitting her number almost exactly, but again, it's not right now enough to kind of outweigh what's happening elsewhere in the state.
The Erie County, which is obviously one of these boomerang counties.
Yeah,
she appears to be holding on.
She appears to be holding on. We have a lot of votes still outstanding. Yeah, she's doing well beyond it, but there's so much vote outstanding, it's hard to say what it is. Scranton is another great one to look at. Kamala Harris is not quite where 538 would suggest she needs to be, not quite where Joe Biden was, a little bit better than Hillary Clinton. Meanwhile, Trump, look at the other side of that. Trump is doing better than he did either time that he ran in Lackawanna County.
So 123,000 votes separates the two of them. Donald Trump in the lead in Pennsylvania right now. Michigan, what are we looking at?
Yeah, in Michigan, we're seeing a lead right now for Harris of almost exactly the same, and we have a lot of the urban areas in the state still to go. I mean, start with Washtenaw County, Ann Arbor. To talk about your college towns, here's an interesting one where Trump is doing a little bit better again than the benchmark. So that might play out that theory. Lansing, there isn't a lot of vote there, but so far we're seeing a little bit better than the benchmark would suggest in a place that will be pretty liberal at the end of the night. And of course, we're going to be really dialed into Wayne County. That is Detroit. It's also Dearborn, where there's a very large Arab American population that's been critical of Kamala Harris and the Joe Biden Israel policy. Not a lot of vote there to learn much about it yet.
And what's the benchmark? How is she doing compared to where she used to be?
She's doing far better, but there's still little vote in there, and I believe it's the early in-person vote, which happened for the first time in Michigan this time.
We're looking at margins of 100,000 votes in Michigan, 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania separates them, and what, 1,500 votes in Wisconsin?
That's right there. It's 5,000. It's less than 5,000 votes in Wisconsin. And again, that is the only path she has left if North Carolina and Georgia don't go her way. We've had some significant news in North Carolina. We were talking earlier about that big vote that was out in Charlotte. Well, we got a lot of that vote now. It's 90% reporting. Kamala Harris did very well. She picked up 170,000 votes out of Charlotte, but she's still losing by 130,000. And those big blue dots are getting smaller. Less and less of that outstanding vote there for her to make up significant margin, and that 135,000 is significant when you're already in a state that has got 84% reporting.
Yeah. All right. Well, North Carolina, it's narrowing the chances in North Carolina, which really then looks like the Rust Belt would be the only path. Virginia's been interesting to me. How close is this race still?
Yeah, we're seeing Harris begin to open up a little bit more of a lead. This shouldn't be close. That's I think what really going to be the story of Virginia, is that there really wasn't a world where this should have been close. And you look at some places where Kamala Harris is running significantly below Joe Biden. Loudoun County, which is the suburbs of Washington D.C., which makes it a bluer state. You know, Trump's not getting to his benchmark, which means he's not going to win the state, but he's running significantly better than he did the other times that he ran. And that, to me, is just that is almost across the board storyline tonight. That places where, whether it's blue or red, Donald Trump is beating his number by a little bit.
Not only beat his number from last time, but beat his number when he ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016. He's outperforming in some of these counties. Let's head up to Rhode Island, New Hampshire, some of these other states that typically we would call earlier in the night.
Yeah, Rhode Island is projected now, but it was closer than it should have been by all rights. And you see some more working class parts of the state tending to do a little bit better. Even in the capital of Providence, Kamala Harris not quite Joe Biden's numbers. You start to see that kind of erosion, that slippage. It doesn't really matter where it is. Yeah, New Hampshire, we haven't had a projection yet. We're talking about a 20,000 vote margin in a state that gets a lot of political attention. A lot of the Democratic votes are here in the southern part. We have to wait to see if we get more, about half of it in so far. But the earlier point still holds that places where Democrats should get a projection pretty early, Connecticut and New Jersey. New Jersey, she'll win New Jersey, but the fact that we even mentioned it on air in an election night, Connecticut on air, 24,000 vote margin, tells you that there's something that she hasn't really been able to bring out her base in places that don't get a lot of attention in the presidential.
The Democratic base, and it's a question of what kind of coalition, if she's able to pull this off, did she put together in order to pull it off? And if not, the questions will be why wasn't she able to pull it off? Show us in each one of these three blue wall states the map that shows us the outstanding vote, the percentage of the vote.
Sure. Start here in Pennsylvania, again, down 120,000 votes. That's Philadelphia and the eastern suburbs. A little bit in Pittsburgh. Places like Harrisburg, State College, Erie, they're 50-50 splits or close to it, so you're not going to net as much either way. That's the path that's still there, and it's very much an existing path. I think Pennsylvania is very realistic. Michigan, I mentioned how little vote is in Detroit right now. I think you'll see it come up in a very dramatic way there. I mean, some of these bubbles overlap because the counties are so close, and there's just a lot of vote that's left there. Harris right now, we'll see some new numbers, it's 100,000 votes or so. And Wisconsin, again, Milwaukee is just going to be huge here. Madison, most of the vote is already in a heavily Democratic place. Right now it's only about 3,000 votes as the numbers continue to roll on.
And I know, Rachel, you've been diving into some of these college towns, actually. This is going to be something we look at later, how young voters split if the gender gap was what we think it could be potentially going into election night. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we know Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, quite frankly, trying to get young male voters to turn out. Vice President Kamala Harris trying to get younger voters to turn out in general. La Crosse, home to 3 different colleges, thousands of students. Let's take a look at how she's doing here. 52% of the vote. She's ahead by 3,500 votes so far. She's pretty much almost where President Biden was with 71% of the vote in. Eau Claire, another one. Take a look here. She's still leading in this county as well, ahead by
Let
4,000.
me just check on the benchmark. I'm just so curious of where she's just slightly under where 538 thought she should be. Can you show us back? Let's go back to La Crosse just for a second. Yeah, she's just under where she needs to be in these college towns. Where else were you looking?
Also in Madison, Dane County, this has high voter turnout here. You still have 89% of the vote in. 90% of this county turns out to vote. I don't know where that happens anywhere else in America, but she's going to need to do well here. And then, of course, Waukesha for former President Donald Trump, going to be absolutely critical. This doesn't have to go Republican. It has to go super Republican. This is really where he has to super energize his base. And then also, Rick was talking about Milwaukee. Former President Donald Trump campaigning here also multiple times. Look, traditionally, yes, this does go towards Democrats, of course. Vice President Kamala Harris right now, 66%. Let's see where she is with the 538 benchmark. Just under that right now. But former President Donald Trump, Waukesha is where he earns the most votes, 2016, 2020. The second highest for him is Milwaukee. So he still has to run up the score in Milwaukee in order to do well.
All right, this is the key number at this hour. 6,500 votes between then Donald Trump leading in Wisconsin tonight. We're going to keep our eye on all three of these states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Don't go away. We'll dive into these numbers even more.
Right now, votes are being counted, and tomorrow, GMA is right there with the morning's first news and
Breaking developments from our powerhouse political team.
tomorrow morning.
When the story matters most. A special edition of Good Morning America with the
coverage of Election Night 2024. Here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to ABC News Live coverage of election night here. We do want to call another state, Kansas. The 6 electoral votes of Kansas will go to former President Donald Trump. In Nebraska tonight, Donald Trump picks up 3 electoral votes, and John Carl, explain to the audience how that works in Nebraska. They split these up.
They split them up by congressional district and an overall winner. So there is a single electoral vote coming out of Nebraska. It's in Omaha. Sometimes they call it Obamaha because Obama won it, helped him win the presidency in 2008. So look, if we're looking at a scenario where Kamala Harris's path to winning the presidency is to win the blue wall and not to win any of the other battleground states in the Sun Belt, it would be 270 votes to 268 votes. The single vote that would put her over the top would be in Omaha. It would be that split electoral vote in the state of Nebraska. Of course, we got a long way to go before that point, but that's why Republicans tried to change the rules in Nebraska. Lindsey Graham made a trip all the way out to Nebraska to try to convince
this election cycle.
Yes, this election cycle. Donald Trump got involved. He called some of the state legislators to try to get them to change the rules there. They didn't change the rules, and that could be a very pivotal single electoral vote.
But it's early. It's
early. We got a long way to go.
So let's go back to some of these Senate races. We want to call a few more races here. In New Jersey, we can call the Senate race now for the Democrat. Congressman Andy Kim, 3-term congressman running for Senate. He wins. He's going to now take over the seat that was once held by Robert Menendez until he was convicted. So Congressman Andy Kim wins in New Jersey. In Virginia, seeking a 3rd term, Senator Tim Kaine has been reelected in Virginia, though the race has not been called in Virginia on the presidential level, which is quite extraordinary for this time of the night. In Texas at this hour, we can say Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who was seeking a 3rd term, has been reelected to the Senate. He'd been challenged by Congressman Colin Allred, of course, former Baylor, University of Tennessee Titans football player, 3-term congressman himself. He had campaigned on so many issues, reproductive rights, one of them. Lindsay, you interviewed him in just the last week or two, and the Democrats really thought he had some prospects there. They were putting some light money into the
As you know, David, football is a little bit more of a popular pastime in Texas than politics is, and Colin Allred really staked a lot on that. Even his campaign ads really started on the football field, ended on the football field. He talked about how he'd taken down a lot tougher opponents than Ted Cruz before. But look, this really was an uphill battle for him. It's been 30 years to Election Day when a Democrat was able to win a statewide position in the state of Texas. And so really, this was a fierce, it shouldn't have been really when you think about it, but Ted Cruz has a pretty high unpopularity rate in the state of Texas. But for Colin Allred, this is really a disappointment. He actually thought that he was going to be able to do it. And do want to give a shout out to Andy Kim, the first Korean American to ever be a U.S. senator.
Now he'll represent New Jersey.
Yes.
No question. Let's get right to John Quinones on the ground in Texas. John, what do you make of the news?
Well, this is one of the most closely watched races in the country, David. The incumbent Republican, Ted Cruz, once a presidential candidate himself, challenged by 3-term Democratic congressman and former, like Lindsay said, former NFL linebacker Colin Allred. They campaigned bitterly in the state over women's reproductive rights, the border, transgender rights. Cruz calling Allred too liberal for Texas. In the end, amidst the changing political landscape here in Texas, Ted Cruz survived the challenge just a few minutes ago. In his victory speech, Cruz specifically thanked Latino voters in the state, which he says have proven all the political prognosticators wrong.
John Quinones on the ground there in Texas. John, thank you. Look at the margin there. That's a much bigger margin than even Beto O'Rourke when he took on Ted Cruz. Came almost within 2 points of defeating Ted Cruz, Rachel.
Yeah, within 2 points, much bigger margin this time, and that is because Colin Allred really underperformed in some of the big cities. So let's take Harris County. This is home to Houston. You can see the 538 benchmark that we have that has him at 58. He got 53. Let's go over to Austin. This is Travis County. 74% is what he needed to meet. 71 is where he was. David, I will tell you, Lindsay already said it, but Ted Cruz, deeply unpopular even in his own state. He's trying to rebrand his image to be more approachable, to be more bipartisan. I don't think there's anywhere else in this country where Cancun was talking about more than in this state. You remember those images
of Ted Cruz at the airport after that deadly winter storm. Calling our record ad after ad on that, but ultimately Ted Cruz remaining victorious in the state.
Rick Klein, you're over at the big board as well. What are you seeing in some of these key battlegrounds? How's Pennsylvania looking at this one?
Yeah, Pennsylvania right now is still a problem for Kamala Harris. An advantage Donald Trump, 100,000 vote margin, a lot left of the vote. And some of these bubbles will tell you the story about what's left. 175,000 votes left in Philadelphia is our estimate. Another 193,000 in Delaware County, Delco, a place where Harris is winning very big. Bucks County, still a lot of votes to be counted at 240,000. So that's what's keeping this as a competitive state right now. But we've seen the numbers shift as more of the Republican parts of the state have fallen in line for Donald Trump. It's been almost consistent across the board. Again, not the biggest counties, but places where he's been able to build on his lead.
I think that's a good example. When you pulled up Perry County, just look at the threshold, the 538 threshold of where he needs to be. And this is the story of the night. He's outperforming slightly in all these rural counties. I think we're seeing this in a number of the swing states, which is helping him to build these margins against Kamala Harris.
That's exactly right. It adds up over time, and I think that's similar to what we've seen in Michigan, similar in Wisconsin. Michigan doesn't have a lot of vote in right now, but you're seeing some areas where Donald Trump in the past has not particularly not been that strong. This is more of a swingy type county. You can see where Joe Biden was. You see where Kamala Harris is. You see where Donald Trump was. You see where he is right now. And in many cases, it's that he's beating himself twice over. Right? This guy's been on the ballot a lot. Voters have had the opportunity to vote for him or vote against him several times now. So again, it's not the big urban areas. That's going to go pretty Democratic, and it's still possible that Harris pulls out enough of the vote in Madison and Milwaukee where we're still waiting on vote. But it becomes difficult as time goes by, and that really is the story that's developing now in North Carolina. When we look at our remaining votes, these blue dots have been getting smaller throughout the night, and when you really get into it, you're talking about 115,000 votes. Okay, that's if you win that 2-1, you start to chip away at that 145,000 vote lead. But there may not be enough of those blue dots left in a Georgia or North Carolina based on what we're seeing tonight.
All right, we'll continue to drill down on these blue wall states with Rick Klein and Rachel Scott over the board. We're closing in on 11 o'clock here in the east, 8 o'clock on the west. 4 more states set to close, including California with its 54 electoral votes. Your local news is next, and we'll see you just minutes from now with more numbers coming in, including the Sun Belt states. We'll be right back.
Yeah, partners.
We're not partners. I'm the detective and you are the consultant. I see you got your baby. To a crime scene.
She is just spectating. You're a single mom with 3 kids pretending to be a cop. I'm not pretending. I spot things that detectives miss. Still think my theory's flimsy? That big brain of hers is going to help us close a lot of cases. Now you're super confident. High Potential, only next Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Look at all these happy wedding guests.
I'm getting married!
Yes, are you crying? You're a sucker for love. Oh, this is a lie. You happy now, babe? Come with me right now. I just don't know what to do.
This is all my fault. It's ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Tonight now, 11 p.m. in the east, 8 p.m. in the west. Polls are now closed in 48 states, including California, with the biggest prize of the night. It's 54 electoral votes at this hour. As you can see in Georgia, we're also following these key battlegrounds. Kamala Harris behind Donald Trump by about 2 points in Georgia, 89% of the vote in, 16 electoral votes on the line right there. North Carolina tonight, still, we can't call this race either. A close race, 85% of the vote in, as you can see, a margin of just about 150,000 votes between them. In Pennsylvania, perhaps the biggest battleground state prize of the night, 67% of the vote in, Donald Trump taking a slight lead over Kamala Harris. There's still significant outstanding vote in the Philadelphia area and other Democratic strongholds. The question is it enough to help catch her back up, and how tight will this race be in the end? We always knew Pennsylvania could be very tight, 19 electoral votes on the line. Michigan at this hour, take a look. These are the numbers. Kamala Harris with a slight lead in that state, just 29% of the vote in. At this hour, the vice president leads the former president in that state. And in Wisconsin, 4 out of the last 6 presidential elections, Wisconsin decided by less than a point. 59% of the vote in, 10 electoral votes on the line. You can see a very close race, about 30,000 votes in between the two candidates. Let's look at Arizona at this hour. Look at that, 49.5, 49.6 in Arizona. Obviously can't call that race. Nevada tonight, the numbers have not come in yet. Another battleground, though, obviously, where the polls have closed. There are projections we can make at this hour, so let's get right to them. In the state of California, Vice President Kamala Harris, where she was once the Attorney General and the Senator of that state, she wins in that state, picks up its 54 electoral votes. In Idaho tonight, former President Donald Trump picks up 4 electoral votes from Idaho. Washington State, polls have closed. The raw vote coming in. The number's not there yet. The moment we have it, we'll put it back up on the screen. Too early to call. And then Oregon, the polls have just closed. Cannot call that state as well. Let's look at the map tonight. 270 again, the magic number of the Electoral College. Here's what we've got. Kamala Harris with 9 states plus Washington, D.C., 145 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 23 states, 214 electoral votes. And of course, those key battleground states: Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of them. The votes are coming in at all of those states. It's extraordinarily close. Our coverage of the 2024 presidential election, it could last for weeks. I'm not sure. I'm just making sure you're all still here with me. It continues for right now.
This is an ABC News special. Election Night in America. Who will be the next president of the United States? From ABC News headquarters in New York, here again, David Muir.
Good evening. As we come back on the air in the West, it's great to have you with us here. ABC News election headquarters here in New York. This is an extremely close race in all of the key battlegrounds. I want to get right to Mary Bruce, covering the vice president, covering the Harris campaign. And basically, you've got your hands on a memo that went out to internal staff saying this is going to buckle up. This is going to be a long election.
This email reads like a reality check from the Harris campaign manager to her staff. We obtained this by ABC News, and she says what we have all been talking about, that they knew this race was going to be razor thin. She says this is exactly what they prepared for, and that their clearest path to 270 remains to be through the blue wall that we've been talking about all night. She says we feel good about what we are seeing. That said, she is cautioning that this is going to take some time. She runs through those blue wall states, saying in Pennsylvania they overperformed turnout expectations in Philadelphia. She says they're seeing especially high turnout with large non-white and student populations. And then in Michigan and Wisconsin, she notes, they are still awaiting a significant amount of the vote to come in Michigan, pointing to Detroit, also saying other results in Michigan are harder to parse. In Wisconsin, she points to remaining vote in Dane and Milwaukee counties. And then what she says, David, is what we do know is this race is not going to come into focus until the early morning hours. David, she urges their team to, quote, get some sleep and get ready to close out strong tomorrow.
John?
But can I say that is absolutely the message that we're hearing tonight from the Kamala Harris campaign. But I am also talking to Democrats, not precisely on the Kamala Harris campaign, but with very much a vested interest in what's happening here, who are feeling that this is looking very bad for them. Who are very concerned about the trends they're seeing, both in those Sun Belt states, concerns about what they're seeing in Wisconsin, and seeing a path. Sure, this is not over. It's certainly not over, but seeing it as a very steep and narrow path for Kamala Harris.
And do they recognize in a lot of these Republican counties, it's sort of like Donald Trump performing just over the threshold of where he needed to be, and the numbers adding up in each one of these battleground states. It's not necessarily sort of the urban centers where they thought Kamala Harris would do well. As Rick has shown us, she has done well in a lot of those areas. It's in the Republican counties where he's done better than he did 4 years ago, that in some cases is doing better than he did in 2016.
Which is astounding because he did far better than anybody anticipated in both of those presidential cycles, in those rural, deep red Republican areas. So yes, that's the primary factor here. Is Trump really appears to be turning out his voters and turning them out at a level perhaps even exceeding what they expected. But there are pockets where she's not doing as well. You look in Wisconsin, that area around Madison, Dane County, she's done very well. She has to do very well, but she's fallen short of where Joe Biden was. Milwaukee, again, a lot of votes still be counted in Milwaukee, but so far what's coming in, not as well as Joe Biden did. Same thing we're seeing in the area around Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County in North Carolina. So a lot of deep concerns among Democrats, very vested in this campaign. Although, to be sure, as you've heard from Mary, the campaign, the Harris campaign, still very much sees a path and says this is going to be long and we need to be patient. And I think when they say long, they don't mean a long night, they mean a long week.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's sobering, John. Appreciate it. Take no offense. We appreciate the reporting and the analysis, and you're right, because you point to Madison, you point to Charlotte, and some of these other cities where she has performed, but not to the level that they hoped that she would in order to pull this off. Donna Brazile, you are a veteran of these campaigns, and when you hear what the campaign chair is saying within the Harris campaign, you've actually heard that before.
Oh, I just opened, when I heard Mary say that, I said, oh, I got a memo finally. Look, I've worked on too many Democratic campaigns to throw in the towel. This is when it gets really good. If you're a good Democrat, you know you got to stay up past midnight to find some joy. There's some outstanding ballots, and of course, Philly, we talked about Milwaukee. I'm still waiting for Detroit to come in because for the first time, Wayne County allowed people to vote on the same day. It's going to be close. We're not going to win all 7 battleground states. The blue wall is clearly more important than ever. I don't want to feel like 2016. By 11:20 at night, we were calling into Milwaukee to say, there's nothing left. Well, if you call into Milwaukee now, there's still a lot of votes left. Philadelphia, a lot of votes. So be patient. Democrats, don't go running for the refrigerator and finding a beer. Just be patient. We're not there yet.
Donna Brazile asking the country to be patient tonight. We do have some news coming in here. The decision desk here at ABC News has not projected Georgia, but we can report that Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has now said at a press conference moments ago that Donald Trump has a, quote, insurmountable lead with the number of votes outstanding in the state of Georgia. He said, it looks like this is pretty much done. I think the results are pretty well baked in. Of course, you all at home remember our reporting on Raffensperger, the Republican who famously stood firm during that key phone call when Donald Trump asked, just find me the 11,000 votes when he lost to Joe Biden. So this is not someone who's necessarily obviously very friendly with Donald Trump. He stands by the process. He stands by the hard work in that state to make sure that this election was safe. And tonight, moments ago, again, we haven't projected this at ABC News, but the Secretary of State in Georgia saying this is insurmountable that Donald Trump has won that.
And look, Brad Raffensperger is a Republican. He's an elected Republican, but he is a straight shooter. No doubt about it. So, again, we haven't called it, but I would take what he said very seriously.
Let's get right to the ground in Georgia. Steve Osunsami in Atlanta. Steve, what do you make of this? And you talked with the Secretary of State. Facts are facts, and he has said that it looks like it's insurmountable at this point.
Well, as John said, he is a straight shooter. When I talked with him, he told me that, his job is to call balls and strikes, not to put his finger on the scale. His reputation speaks for himself on that issue. I will tell you that we've all been here, the producer I work with, Brandon Bauer, we've been really practicing our math skills, trying to figure out, whether or not there are enough votes for Harris to make up the deficit, which at one point was about 150,000 votes. We're seeing those votes come in from the different county, and it's not clear, as Raffensperger has pointed out, that there are enough votes, even if she were to continue sort of the break that she has had in some of those counties and some of those vote-rich counties like Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, where there's still a little bit of vote outstanding to make up that deficit. I'll tell you, I've also talked with both campaigns You know, the Trump campaign is celebrating tonight. They're already looking forward to being able to say that this is a state that they won. They point out that they did very, very well in the rural counties. You know, we have a setup here, rural versus urban, and they clearly performed well in the rural counties. Some of those counties where we saw up to 70% turnout, those counties made a difference. What's interesting is when you look at the numbers and the turnout here and the way the vote fell, it wasn't that Harris did so much terribly than Biden performed 4 years ago. What you do see is that in the rural counties, the rural voters showed up and showed out.
I wonder, Steve, if part of that is the encouragement to vote early, the combination of early voting and day of voting, and if that did just help them rack up the vote. The Republican Party in Georgia, when you look at sort of county by county, I think your point is well made, that they were really able to increase the margins. And I was saying with Rick Klein earlier, Donald Trump has outperformed himself in many cases, even what he did in 2016.
You know, we saw a huge early vote among Republicans, which we didn't see in years past. You know, we were sort of expecting, a lot of people were expecting that what we were going to see today was that when the pre-vote came out, that Harris would have a significant lead, or it would have been closer than it was. But I think that evaporated in large part because we saw so many Republicans in the pre-vote stand in line in the Republican counties that had pre-votes. You know, one thing that's interesting is something else we saw today. You know, there are a number of counties where there isn't an early vote. A lot of these red counties also had good turnout today. We didn't see, as we were driving around the city and sort of anecdotally talking to different people, we didn't see the craziness that we've seen in years past. And a lot of that is because a lot of this election happened in the pre-vote. That's when most of this was decided.
Steve-O in Atlanta, Steve Ozonsami, thanks so much. Ryan, what do you make of this?
Well, it's not where you want to be if you're the Harris campaign, on one hand. On the other hand, there was never, the Trump campaign was always planning on winning Georgia and North Carolina. But clearly Kamala Harris's team decided that maybe they could get lucky and pick one of these two off. It's not over yet, but the fact that they spent so much time there thinking that they might get lucky there, it doesn't look like they will. And now all their eggs are going to be in that blue wall. The other thing that's interesting about all this tonight is that one change in the law from 2020 to 2024, these states are counting a lot of these early votes right now. Georgia started counting this morning. North Carolina started counting at 5 o'clock. Wisconsin 7, Michigan 7, Pennsylvania 7. One note, and Rick hit it earlier, which is important about Wisconsin. Right now, the last I checked, Donald Trump has a lead of about 38,000 votes. That was just a few minutes ago. I don't know if it held. But there's 31,000 ballots that still need to be counted in Milwaukee. So the Republicans in Wisconsin are saying Donald Trump's going to have about a 21 to 24,000 vote lead before those 31,000 votes get counted. So this is going to be very, very close. And if you look at Racine and Kenosha County down in the southeast corner, you'll see that those two counties together, if you go up one north in Racine, there's only 23% in, but that's a huge, those are some huge numbers where they need to be.
So let's just drill down on that, Ryan. So, what are your sources telling you? Where does Donald Trump need to be before these final votes in some of these Democrat-rich counties?
Right. People believe it. I was just talking to Governor Walker on text about this, and he agrees that Donald Trump needs to have about a 21,000 vote lead before those 31,000 absentee ballots get counted or entered into the system in Milwaukee that are still sitting out there. So it's, he's got a 41,000, Trump's got a 41,000 vote lead right now. There's more to come, and there's more blue votes to come in as well. So a long way to go, but I'd rather be Donald Trump here than Kamala Harris in Wisconsin.
Say that again, Donald.
I would rather be Kamala Harris. Look, you know the state better than I know it, but I also know how difficult it is to get all of the votes counted in Milwaukee. And also Dane. I mean, Dane had not only a significant early vote, but also a great turnout today with the same day registration as well as some of the young people in line. So I still believe the verdict is still out. We may not know Milwaukee, the final verdict until sometime tomorrow morning. It's too early.
Could be right.
You owe me a beer.
I don't think you're gonna be. It could be. I'm not saying.
I'll take Milwaukee best.
I mean, I'd rather be.
Spotted cow. But Dane County, they've already counted 94% of the vote. And she seems to have fallen short. That's a.
John, these are razor thin margin.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
come on, let's not
But
try
let's
to
look at
win
the,
by a blowout. I mean, she's getting there.
let's look at the map that shows the outstanding vote, Rick.
Yeah,
By party here.
yeah, I mean, that's Milwaukee. That's exactly what Ryan's is talking about. It's a huge amount of vote that is Milwaukee. That's why 43,000 is not necessarily a safe lead. Madison, a little bit of a smaller amount, but there's some red spots on the map as well. You go out to the west, to St. Croix. I mean, we don't really have any vote there to speak of at all. So there's still Republican votes too. But Ryan's is right. I mean, as with all three of these Midwestern cities, we're not really going to know until we have a complete portrait of what's going on inside Philadelphia, where there's still, according to our numbers, about 120,000 votes that are outstanding. That's just Philadelphia, not even counting its suburbs. Similarly, if you go up to Michigan, we don't have a lot in Detroit, only about 15,000. There's another 750,000 votes in Detroit, Dearborn, and Wayne County. And as we just talked about, Milwaukee. But those are the big urban areas, and that's what makes any lead right now potentially illusory. North Carolina and Georgia does look different right now, David. It's very hard to see how that ground gets made up because you start to see those blue dots shrink over time. There's less and less vote. If you get into it, you realize, well, Fulton County has 93,000 or 93% of the voting, only 41,000 left. So where you get enough votes to shrink the margin becomes difficult to see at this hour. Mecklenburg, Charlotte already came in as well, and we're starting to see Trump, really rob the score. I mean, this is obviously not a meaningful number at the end of the night, but as of now, he's winning the popular vote by 5,600,000 votes. That will change with California. There's a lot of votes out there, but that's not a result that a lot of people saw coming, that it would even be close on the popular vote side. I think it's a function of all that rural run-up and how close he has kept it in all these other states.
Extraordinary night unfolding. Rick Klein over at the big board. Rick, thanks. We do have some calls at this hour. ABC News can now project that Oregon, that Vice President Kamala Harris will pick up the 8 electoral votes from Oregon. She has won the state of Oregon. She's also won the state of Washington tonight. The 12 electoral votes from Washington will go to Kamala Harris. And we have a race to call in California tonight in the Senate race. Congressman Adam Schiff, 12-term congressman in California, beats Republican Steve Garvey. Obviously, that was an open seat after Dianne Feinstein, the late Dianne Feinstein. Let's get over to Kate Whitworth in California covering this race. Kate, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so David, this will now be the first time in 3 decades that California will be represented by 2 male senators, and it is certainly an exciting night here for Democrats in California. We are at the Democratic Party where they do actually expect Adam Schiff to address the crowd here momentarily. This has been a race that Democrats have been very, very confident in this win. He is certainly a name known well across this country in terms of politics. He has been one of the leaders against Donald Trump in several issues, and he feels like anytime Donald Trump invokes his name negatively, that actually bodes well for him and his campaign. He's also been spending a tremendous amount of his own political capital helping other races in other battleground states, as well as down ballot races here in California, in particular, some of those hotly contested and very expensive House races in particular. And you guys, I just spoke with Rusty Hicks, who is the California Democratic Party chair, and he said, California is generous with time, talent, and treasure, and he says they have doubled down on that this year because of who is at the top of the ticket, the daughter of California and Kamala Harris. He says they're sending busloads of people. They're making phone calls in other battleground states, David, including Nevada and Arizona.
All right, Katie Whitworth on the ground in California.